where you see the passing of time.
The crowds in St. Peter's Square are praying like mad for the Pope's light.
Where moments refuse to die.
This is a momentous hour in world history. This is the invasion of Hitler's Europe.
And where victory lives on.
Plenty of girls are being kissed by plenty of boys they don't know, and they do not care.
You can love it, hate it, embrace it, or turn away.
Lenin was shot to death late last night outside his apartment building.
But it is a past we all share.
Come on out here and give me a salute. Big Navy salute.
This is where yesterday has a home, where we wonder what it was like back then.
Go forward, knights, in safety.
And not too long ago.
His spirit must live on.
It's where history has its place and where the past comes alive. The History Channel.
June 15th, 1905. The most formidable battleship in Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the Potemkin, is on a routine exercise testing her mighty guns. All is peaceful. Then the crew refuses to eat. Their food is riddled with maggots. Out of this infestation comes the germ of mutiny, then a fever of revolution that consumes an entire nation and threatens to topple a monarchy that has reigned for 300 years. Revolt on the Potemkin. There is no tale of the sea more dramatic than one about a ship in revolt. The story of a crew risking death for freedom is what makes a mutiny so extraordinary. Even more compelling is the mutiny that inspires a revolution on land. It happened on the battleship Potemkin. Russia, 1905. An empire in revolt. The tumultuous year began with thousands of striking laborers marching on the Winter Palace of Tsar Nicholas II in St. Petersburg. Government troops fired on the unarmed protesters, killing and wounding hundreds. The slaughter on this bloody Sunday gave birth to a revolutionary movement that swept through Russia.
Russian society at the beginning of the 20th century was fraught with very serious discontent, major divisions among all of the elements of Russian society. This largely the result of two factors. One, ongoing industrial development, and two, the rise of an educated middle class, which found autocratic government incomprehensible. Completely outmoded and antediluvian. There were many revolutionaries who were seeking both to take advantage of and stir up discontent.
The chief cause of the mounting unrest in 1905 was the unpopular Russo-Japanese War. This misguided attempt by the Tsar to expand the empire led to a humiliating defeat at Tsushima Strait. There, Japanese Admiral Togo took advantage of the Russian Navy's faulty equipment and poor leadership and annihilated much of the fleet in just 4 hours.
The Battle of Tsushima had a tremendous morale effect. There was some pride in the Russian Navy, of course, among the officers and the sailors, but that pride was pretty much destroyed by being beaten by the Japanese, and so badly. And there were rumors that the Black Sea Fleet was next to be sent to the Pacific. And that, of course, did not help matters at all.
Discontent was already running high among the sailors of the Black Sea Fleet. Like workers throughout Russia, they demanded social change and organized secret revolutionary committees on every ship. These subversive groups spread word of a general mutiny to take place during summer maneuvers. The proposed uprising did not stand a chance without the participation of the most powerful ship in the fleet, the Potemkin, named after Prince Alexandrovich Potemkin, Catherine the Great's favorite and ruthless first minister.
Within the Black Sea Fleet itself, the Potemkin was the newest ship, the most powerful, the fastest, the guns with the longest range. Therefore, within the waters of the Black Sea, it was the most formidable ship.
Convincing the Potemkin's 600-man crew to participate in the insurrection was the responsibility of Afanasy Matsushenko, a 26-year-old working-class Ukrainian. To the officers, he was just a torpedo quartermaster. To the men, Matsushenko was the supreme commander of the ship's Revolutionary Committee.
Afanasy Matsushenko was revolutionary by inclination. He was hot-headed, he was charismatic. His anger was directed against people that he considered oppressive, against the czarist authorities, against especially naval officers whom he detested, as did many other sailors in the Black Sea Fleet.
Matsushenko believed that if he could incite the 600-man crew of the Potemkin to rebellion, then the success of the general mutiny was guaranteed. He would not have to wait long for his opportunity. On June 25th, the Potemkin was detached from fleet headquarters in Sevastopol and ordered to sail for Tundra Bay. There, she would test the linings of her mighty 12 and 6-inch guns before rejoining the fleet for summer maneuvers. To Matsushenko, the choppy seas and fresh wind whipping off Tundra Island on the 15th were harbingers of the trouble to come. To the Potemkin's captain, Eugene Golikov, the unfavorable conditions meant only that the test firings would have to be postponed by a day. Captain Golikov ordered Lieutenant Claude, commander of torpedo boat N267, the auxiliary vessel accompanying the Potemkin, to purchase provisions in Odessa, the nearest port. That evening, the N267 returned with sides of beef for the crew's staple of meat borscht. The next morning, the battleship's crew awoke to a pungent odor coming from the spar deck. The beef had spoiled and was crawling with maggots. Sailors angrily protested, as dramatized here in Sergei Eisenstein's silent film masterpiece, The Battleship Potemkin.
Throw the stinking stuff overboard! Even the Japanese wouldn't feed us stuff like this. Get the doctor to look at it.
Maggots were quite common in the Russian Navy, especially during the summer. They may have been more common in the summer of 1905. In the Black Sea, it was a little bit hotter than usual. The butchers who were selling the meat were eager to unload spoiled meat if they could on government purchasing agents.
Captain Golikov summoned Surgeon Smirnov, the Potemkin's senior physician, to investigate. After examining the beef, the doctor judged that it was of excellent quality and required only a wash with some vinegar. Satisfied with the doctor's report, Captain Golikov considered the matter ended. But not his second commander, Ippolit Giliarovsky, the most feared and detested officer on the ship. He made it a point to know what was going on with the crew and was aware that a subversive element was converting the men to the revolution. While other officers took their midday meal, Giliarovsky made an unannounced tour of the mess deck. There, he found sailors refusing to eat their meat borscht and ready to riot. Giliarovsky alerted Captain Golikov of the situation. Captain Golikov ordered a roll call on the quarterdeck. He declared before the entire company that such disorder would not be tolerated on a ship of the Russian Imperial Navy, and demanded that those willing to eat the borscht step forward. Only the petty officers complied. The captain promised those who refused to eat that the matter would be reported to the fleet's commander-in-chief for future disciplinary action. Golikov dismissed the men and returned to his cabin. Fearing the crew would become more hostile, Giliarovsky ordered the men to reassemble and the guard to bring a tarpaulin. Under old Navy rules, a tarp was used to cover mutineers before they were shot. Giliarovsky believed the mere sight of it would scare the men into submission. He repeated the captain's order that those willing to eat the borscht step forward. Again, only the petty officers complied. Furious, Giliarovsky demanded that the ringleaders be rounded up. Guards grabbed men from the ranks. Giliarovsky passed the order to the firing squad. This was the moment Matrushenko had been waiting for. He realized that although the mutiny was meant to be carried out by the entire fleet the next day, Giliarovsky's order was the perfect catalyst for immediate insurrection.
Matrushenko was first a revolutionary and then somebody who understood what revolution was. He was a man in search of justification for his own anger at higher authorities.
Matrushenko seized the moment. He surged to the front and called out to the firing squad.
Don't shoot your own comrades! You cannot kill your own shipmates! Don't fire, comrades!
Other sailors took up Matrushenko's cry. Giliarovsky shouted at the firing squad to shoot. The men refused to raise their rifles. The crew went wild.
Get yourself rifles and ammunition! We are taking over the ship!
The Potemkin mutiny had begun. The Russian Revolution was at sea. On June 15th, 1905, the waters of the Black Sea erupted in violence. In an instant, one of the most imposing symbols of Tsarist might, the battleship Potemkin, became a flashpoint of rebellion. Armed with rifles seized from the ship's armory, mutineers, shouting death to tyrants, roamed the decks of the ship hunting officers to shoot. Among the rebels was Seaman Grigory Vakulinchuk. His target was Commander Giliarovsky, the officer who had given the order to execute the men who refused to eat the meat borscht. Vakulinchuk's shot missed. Giliarovsky returned fire with a gun he'd grabbed from a reluctant member of the firing squad. Vakulinchuk fell wounded. Matrushenko, the leader of the rebellion, confronted Giliarovsky. The officer ordered the mutineer to drop his rifle. Declaring the ship belongs to us now, Matrushenko shot Giliarovsky dead, making the senior officer the first fatality of the insurrection. The enraged mutineers threw his body overboard.
This was a decisive moment. The mutiny would not have occurred had Giliarovsky not pulled his gun. The mutiny would not have occurred had Matrushenko not taken the initiative and shot Giliarovsky. That was the decisive moment.
Soon other officers ended up in the water, some falling from their bullet wounds, others jumping for survival. Under a hail of gunfire, they desperately swam for refuge on board torpedo boat N267, the Potemkin's auxiliary vessel.
The officers were utterly stunned by what had just happened. Nothing like this had ever happened to them before. This kind of mutiny was inconceivable both to the officers and also to many of the sailors who, of course, had never done anything like this either, and were therefore themselves very confused about what they had done.
In the chaos, some mutineers searched for the captain, others found Surgeon Smirnov and his cabin attempting to commit suicide. They dragged the doctor, bleeding from his self-inflicted knife and gunshot wounds, up on deck. Before throwing him overboard, vengeful sailors forced Smirnov to bite into the maggot-infested meat he had approved for their consumption.
We are gonna blow up!
The mutiny almost ended as suddenly and violently as it had begun, when sailors reported that officers were in the magazine fusing the ship's mines. Descending into the vessel, mutineers captured the men moments before they lit the explosives. One of the officers admitted that the captain had put them up to it, insisting it would be better to destroy the Potemkin than relinquish it to a mob. Moments later, Captain Golikov himself emerged from his hiding place, dressed only in his underclothes, probably in preparation for the swim that would have followed the narrowly averted destruction of the ship. Without his fancy uniform, Golikov was a pathetic sight. Matsushenko took pity on him. But a seaman who had recently been demoted by the captain reminded his comrades that if Golikov lived, he would make sure they were all executed. Better to finish him off now. With Captain Golikov's execution, the Potemkin became the first ship in what rebel leader Matsushenko proclaimed the Free Russian Navy. Meanwhile, torpedo boat N267, with all the Potemkin's surviving officers on board, attempted to escape, steaming away towards fleet headquarters in Sevastopol. Matsushenko ordered gunners to fire on the boat. A shot struck the N267. The torpedo boat instantly stopped. The Free Russian Navy had acquired its second vessel. The Potemkin mutiny was over. What no foreign power could do, a gang of mutineers had accomplished in a half hour. They had brought down one of the mightiest battleships in the Tsar's navy. 7 officers were killed, many more had been wounded. The mutineers suffered one fatality, Seaman Vakulinchuk. Before he died, his comrades vowed to make him a martyr to the revolution. Matsushenko surveyed the aftermath. He described it as a terrible but triumphant picture. He then ordered the decks cleaned of blood.
Well, the implications socially, politically of a mutiny were catastrophic. I mean, an enormous event in Russia. One expected the military to be obedient. Here were men sworn to be loyal to the Tsar, his trusted military people. For them to rebel signified that the whole system was shaking.
From the capstan on which the captain had addressed them only an hour before, the charismatic Matsushenko harangued the men.
All of Russia is waiting to rise up and throw off the chains of slavery. The great day is near, and it is on this ship that the revolution has started. Soon the other vessels of the Black Sea Fleet will join us, and then we shall link up with our brothers on shore. But we shall be helpless comrades if we don't work together.
To make sure the mutineers worked together, Matsushenko formed a People's Committee. Made up of 30 members elected by the crew, the committee assumed complete control of the ship. Its first order of business was to select a destination. The rebels could not return to their base in Sevastopol. There they would come under the guns of the fleet and the city's fortifications. They had to choose a place, argued Matsushenko, that would accept them as outlaws of the state. It would have to be a place where they could obtain food and fuel, and where the populace would be sympathetic to the revolutionary movement. It could only be Odessa.
Odessa is the 4th largest city in Russia at this time. It had all the coaling facilities you could possibly need for a battleship of the Potemkin's caliber. It's also got a fairly large working class, a group of people who the guys on the Potemkin knew at the time of the mutiny were already expressing their discontent with the government.
By sheer coincidence, the same day the Potemkin crew mutinied, striking workers marched through the streets of Odessa. Their leaders realized that revolutionary spirit alone was not enough to overthrow the government. Along with the will, they needed the weapons to advance their cause. The next morning, the ultimate weapon arrived. Outside Odessa harbor, a ship approached waving a revolutionary red banner instead of the traditional flag of St. Andrew. It was the Potemkin. Konstantin Feldman, a student and local revolutionary activist, recalled the sight.
I stood in dumb, awestruck ecstasy before this marvelous apparition. But there was no standing still for long. One must hurry down to it. The work that had been begun must be finished. The great battle must be fought at last.
Feldman was not alone. Hundreds gathered on Odessa's waterfront to show support for the mutineers, voluntarily resupplying the ship with their own hard-earned bread. They stood solemnly as sailors from the Potemkin brought Vakulinchuk's body ashore, placing him on the docks to lie in state. A notice pinned to his uniform read, "Before you lies the body of Grigory Vakulinchuk, a sailor savagely killed by the senior officer of the battleship Potemkin for complaining about borscht that was bad. Let us make the sign of the cross and say peace to his ashes. Let us avenge ourselves on our oppressors. Death to them and hurrah for freedom." As mourners solemnly filed past the seaman's bier, the Potemkin Ships Committee issued a series of manifestos. One called on the city's military forces to surrender and unite with the workers in common cause. Another boasted that the mutineers will free the people of Odessa and all of Russia. One ultimatum threatened Odessa city officials. "If resistance is offered to us," it thundered, "then we will bombard the city with our guns." City officials offered no immediate resistance, but Nicholas II did. Receiving news of the mutiny at his palace in St. Petersburg, the Tsar responded swiftly and unequivocally. He declared war on the Potemkin. The arrival of the battleship Potemkin and her mutineers in the Russian port of Odessa gave new impetus to the city's revolutionary movement. Striking workers rallied at the waterfront bier of the martyred seaman Vakulinchuk to voice their demands. One speaker proclaimed,
"Comrades, there are thousands of us here. None of us will stand for the slavery and oppression of the government any longer. Sailors, workers, leave your ship and your benches, and let's march into town together. With the protection of Potemkin guns, we can win our freedom."
City officials responded with alarm. The mayor of Odessa went to St. Petersburg personally to inform government representatives of the crisis. Left in charge was General Korkanov, Odessa's military chief. He faced a unique situation. While other cities had put down rallies and marches of striking workers, none had had the guns of Russia's most potent weapon aimed at point-blank range at them. Vowing not to be intimidated, Korkanov was poised to assert his authority. When rebellious crowds surged onto the city landmark Richelieu Steps, Korkanov took action. He called out the Cossacks, an elite force of cavalry troops fiercely loyal to the Tsar, to quell the disturbance. The carnage that followed was immortalized by Sergei Eisenstein into one of the most unforgettable scenes in film history. The massacre on the Richelieu Steps compelled Konstantin Feldman and other local activists to seek an alliance with the Potemkin's crew.
Feldman was a student, a doctrinaire, revolutionary, the kind of person that, for instance, Matyushenko was very suspicious of. Feldman, along with many other revolutionaries, rushed out to the ship as soon as they saw what had happened. Feldman had not previously thought about using the Navy as a base for revolutionary operations, but you could not possibly pass up an opportunity like this.
To Feldman and his comrades' surprise, the ship's committee refused to participate in any joint action.
At this point in time, the Potemkin doesn't know where all the rest of the Black Sea Fleet is. They could be just over the horizon, ready to come in and begin to shell the Potemkin. For them to take 200 men or 300 men and arm them with rifles and send them out to help the revolutionaries in Odessa would have been to divide their own forces fatally, because they wouldn't have been able to operate the ship and defend themselves.
Feldman persisted. In an impassioned speech, he proposed that the Potemkin follow through on its threat to bombard the city. Again, the committee refused. Matyushenko argued that city authorities had not yet offered the Potemkin any direct resistance to justify such a militant response. The threat of bombardment, Matyushenko emphasized, was potent enough. To express solidarity with the workers, the committee offered a more peaceful alternative: a grand funeral procession for Vakulinchuk through the streets of Odessa. After much debate, the proposal was approved. In the city, General Kokhanov remained vigilant, concerned about Potemkin's potential to incite further civil disobedience.
There was the danger that revolution would spread from the harbor into the rest of the city because of the revolutionary disturbances that had been going on for some time. The danger that the Potemkin might trigger an even more powerful explosion was quite real. In the late afternoon on June 15th, looting began to break out in the port area. Fires began to break out. There was a panic in the port area.
That night, General Kokhanov, determined to regain control of the city, ordered his troops to crack down on the striking protesters. It was the bloodiest night of the 1905 revolution. By dawn, the city was the scene of devastating carnage. The streets were in ruins and covered with thousands of dead bodies. Kokhanov had regained control of the city.
Cruel as it was, Kokhanov's method of dealing with the Odessa consequences of the Potemkin mutiny were quite effective. The slaughter was so horrendous that all revolutionary activity temporarily abated. The kinds of potshots that civilians had been taking at troops and at police in previous days just stopped. People were appalled, and they, of course, were frightened of a repetition.
In the midst of the upheaval, the Potemkin People's Committee asked permission from Kokhanov to hold their funeral for Vakulinchuk.
The Potemkin threatened to bombard Odessa if this command were not respected. Kokhanov gave in. He decided that this was a reasonable thing to do given the circumstances.
In spite of his crackdown on demonstrations of any kind, the general personally assured Matyushenko that his troops would not interfere with the procession. Thousands turned out, crying, "Long live the Potemkin," as sailors bore the coffin of their fallen comrade through the rubble-strewn streets. Matyushenko led the mourners.
I have never seen such a solemn sight as the funeral of our dear comrade, or so many genuine tears as were shed over the body of the sailor.
The procession made its way to Odessa's military cemetery, where Vakulinchuk's body was laid to rest. Without warning, Kokhanov's forces suddenly opened fire on the mourners. Those that did not fall fled in panic. 3 sailors failed to make it back to the ship. No one ever knew what happened to them.
It's not clear at all why the firing began. It's quite possible that the soldiers came to believe, for whatever reason, that they were themselves in some way being threatened, and then responded by shooting at anybody that they thought threatened them.
General Kokhanov had broken his promise. It was time for the Potemkin mutineers to make their stand. After conducting a fiery meeting, they made a bold decision. The Potemkin would bombard Odessa with her guns. The ambush of mourners at Seaman Rokolinchuk's funeral led the Potemkin Ships Committee to issue an ultimatum. The Potemkin would bombard Odessa that evening and cease fire only when all military action against the workers was halted and troops withdrawn from the city. The Potemkin's intended target was a theater in which General Kokhanov and his deputies were holding a conference to decide what to do about the mutineers. When the hour approached, the Potemkin fired 3 warning blanks. To a romantic like political activist Konstantin Feldman, they were chimes of freedom.
Behind the smoke of the shot, I seemed to see the red battalions of the Army of the Revolution, marching victoriously ever farther and farther into the heart of Russia. And here, the triumph and rejoicing of the conquering people.
The Potemkin crew gave the people of Odessa 15 minutes to take shelter before they fired the first live round. Without a map, it would be difficult to make a clean hit on the theater. It sat on an incline amidst a cluster of buildings. All eyes were fixed on the men at the 6-inch gun. They aimed the weapon at the theater. The order was given to fire. The first live round overshot the theater and took off part of the roof of a nearby house. Quickly, a second live round was ordered. Like the first round, the second overshot its target, causing superficial damage to a lodging house. No one was hurt in either blast. Rather than continue the bombardment and risk injuring innocent people, Matsushenko called a ceasefire.
Why did they miss when they were aiming at the headquarters in Odessa? Okay, we know that during the initial mutiny, one of the people who dies is the chief gunnery officer. There are no other people who really know how to deal with this except the chief petty officers who deal with gunnery. Chief petty officers are not people who really are that sympathetic to the rank and file in the Navy. They're guys who are in for the long haul. They're, in effect, officers of a non-commissioned nature. So they go along with the mutineers, but when they're asked to deliberately do something that's going to jeopardize their position in the long run, they sabotage it. Very probably the guy who directed the fire of a 6-inch gun deliberately missed, or at least set the coordinates enough so that he knew he wasn't going to hit what he aimed at.
I think there's something of a problem in firing at Mother Russia. You know, this was land, their land, and to fire their own guns at their own land and people takes a lot more than I think these sailors were willing to commit at the time.
Having lost their opportunity to take control of Odessa, the Potemkin People's Committee attempted to meet with General Kokhanov's representatives during the ceasefire. They were rebuffed. Kokhanov had the upper hand now. The failure of the bombardment, combined with the reinforcement of thousands of troops, only solidified his control of the city. The crew of the Potemkin had only one hope for any real chance of wresting control of the city and starting the revolution. The arrival of other mutinous ships from the Black Sea Fleet. While the mutineers pondered their next move in Odessa, the Admiralty at Fleet Headquarters in Sevastopol were considering their own options. Upon receiving news of the mutiny, Vice Admiral Kreger called a conference of ship commanders. If they could suppress the Potemkin uprising, Kreger plotted, then a general mutiny could be prevented. He dispatched a squadron of 8 vessels commanded by Rear Admiral Vishnevetsky to Odessa. His orders were to capture the Potemkin, then rendezvous with the rest of the fleet in Tundra Bay in time for maneuvers. When the Potemkin spied flags of St. Andrew instead of red banners of revolution waving from the masts of the approaching squadron, the mutineers steamed out of Odessa to confront the enemy. The turning point of the revolution seemed at hand. Instead of confrontation, there would be only postponement. When the opposing ships were within 4 miles of each other, Rear Admiral Vishnevetsky lost his nerve and backed down. Intimidated by the Potemkin's guns, which outranged any of his command, Vishnevetsky decided to seek reinforcements and ordered the squadron back to Sevastopol. Crisis averted, the victorious Potemkin returned to Odessa. Receiving the news in Sevastopol, a furious Vice Admiral Kreger ordered a second attempt to capture the ship. This time he would lead the mission himself. Insisting on victory, he invoked Nicholas II.
The Tsar himself had ordered the elimination of this shameful blot on the honor of his fighting forces. There must be no failure.
The men of the Potemkin had stood up to their fleet without backing down. Could they do it again? When the lookout reported that the squadron reapproached, the Potemkin steamed out of Odessa to confront them one more time. Matsushenko knew that there would be no turning back. This time, guns would be fired, men would die. Not just any men, fellow sailors, comrades, brothers. It was the price of revolution, and Matsushenko was willing to pay it. He paced the bridge, muttering to himself.
This will decide things. This will decide things. This will decide things.
The stage was set for one of the most dramatic moments of the 1905 revolution, as the battleship Potemkin and the squadron from the Black Sea Fleet raced towards their inevitable showdown on the high seas. This would be the first time that Russian naval vessels ever fired on each other. A sea battle no sailor dared to contemplate.
The atmosphere on board the Potemkin was, of course, quite tense. The atmosphere on board the other ships was probably even more tense. In the first place, many sailors in the squadron were committed to the same cause that the mutineers on the Potemkin were. In the second place, the officers of those ships had no way of knowing how their crews were going to react if they got into any kind of engagement with the Potemkin. Many of the sailors on the ships did everything they could to obstruct the engagement.
Mutual demands for surrender were rejected. All decks were cleared. The atmosphere was so charged that Vice Admiral Kreger ducked when the Potemkin's 6-inch gun swung around and pointed directly at his vessel. There was no fire, but a blow with more impact than a shot from a 12-inch gun was about to happen. As George the Conqueror, one of the squadron ships, neared the Potemkin, her deck and turret hatches were thrown open as if at a prearranged signal. Hundreds of the George's crew poured onto her deck shouting, "Hurrah for the Potemkin!" Matsushenko was ecstatic.
This was the moment we had been waiting for. It was the beginning of the revolution. The Tsar's puppets had ordered us a welcome of shellfire. Instead, there were cheers.
Uncertain of the loyalty of the other crews and wanting to avoid a general mutiny on the high seas, Kreger ordered the rest of the squadron back to Sevastopol. The engagement was over. The Potemkin and George the Conqueror steamed proudly into Odessa. In Sevastopol, pressure mounted to capture the Potemkin. Action came swiftly. The Admiralty sent the 5,000 crew members of the squadron home on indefinite leave. The Black Sea Fleet effectively ceased to exist. In its place, a self-named suicide squad of 40 loyal officers set out in a destroyer vowing to bring in the rogue battleship. On the decks of the Potemkin, the real threat was not an external force, but rather internal division. No sooner had George the Conqueror joined the Potemkin than dissension broke out in her ranks. Factions loyal to the Tsar asserted themselves and regained control of the ship. Within hours, the George surrendered to Odessa authorities.
Immediately after the crew undid the mutiny, turned the ship back over to the officers, the sailors on the Potemkin panicked. Even Matsushenko panicked, and he was usually the last to do so.
Without the cooperation of the George and the other ships in the fleet, the Potemkin could not launch a successful attack on Odessa and begin the revolution in earnest. Time was running out, and so were provisions and options. The Potemkin Ships Committee had to decide on a course of action quickly.
They really had no choice at that point. They knew that if they were captured by the Russians, there'd be a very quick trial and they'd be shot. The Tsar had made it clear that he would crush them. So I think they had no choice but to leave and to get out as quickly as possible.
The Potemkin mutineers made their most agonizing decision. They would leave their homeland and surrender to Romania, the nearest nation that they believed would grant them political asylum. The Potemkin left Odessa with a new passenger on board, Konstantin Feldman, the student revolutionary.
For Feldman, the decision to stay on the Potemkin was one that didn't even have to be made. Of course he was going to stay on the Potemkin. This was where the revolutionary action was. Any revolutionary would have wanted to be there. He had some hope of providing coordination between the sailors on the Potemkin and revolutionaries on shore. And the sailors themselves hoped that somebody like Feldman would be able to get in touch with revolutionaries on shore if they should ever need to seek their cooperation.
It was a sad, bittersweet voyage. The mutineers, once full of revolutionary spirit, were deflated by disappointment, exhaustion, and hunger. Tangible acceptance of their fate came when mutineers cast their red flag overboard. Matsushenko recalled the event.
Only the Black Sea witnessed our broken hearts and our tears.
Nearly 2 weeks after the mutiny erupted, and before the suicide squad could catch her, the Potemkin arrived in the Romanian port of Constanța. In exchange for the ship, the mutineers were offered the option of Romanian citizenship and the promise of a free life there for as long as they wished. 16 officers declined, claiming they had been forced at gunpoint to remain aboard the Potemkin. They were allowed to leave for Sevastopol. Some die-hard mutineers, in their last rebellious act, attempted secretly to scuttle the ship. They were discovered by the Tsarists. One mutineer was killed in the ensuing struggle. The Tsar had a different fate in mind for what he had denounced as this shameful blot. He ordered the Navy to salvage the Potemkin and tow her back to Russia. Once in port, he renamed her Low Peasant as a mark of disgrace. Several years later, with World War I raging, Russia's new provisional government renamed the ship Fighter for Freedom to help raise the crew's morale. After uneventful war service, the ship, once known as the Potemkin, was sunk by her officers in Sevastopol in April 1919. The fates of the mutineers varied. The few that were captured by or surrendered to Russian authorities were either executed or sent to prison for as many as 20 years. Among them was Konstantin Feldman, who escaped from jail while awaiting trial and safely crossed the Austrian border. The vast majority stayed in Romania. They were given jobs in shipyards and factories. Many married and raised families. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the workers and the military finally overthrew the Tsar, the men of the Potemkin were welcomed back to their homeland as heroes to inspire younger generations with their tale of mutiny. Afanasy Matsushenko would never live to see himself hailed as a hero. In 1907, he accepted terms of an amnesty and returned to Russia.
Apparently, Matsushenko, who spent some time in Romania and then went to Paris, just never fit in abroad. He wanted to be a Russian. So he went home to be a Russian, and I can't imagine that the guy wouldn't have at least considered the possibility that what did finally happen would happen to him.
At the border, he was taken into custody and later hanged as a traitor.
The Potemkin mutiny seemed to be a bolt of lightning out of the blue. It was an utterly unprecedented event. Not just in Russia, but really in modern naval history. It shaped the way Russia's revolutionaries thought about the armed forces after that. They began to think of the armed forces as a potential recruiting ground for revolutionaries, individuals, and for entire units.
If there is a moral to the Potemkin mutiny, it is that men who are facing what they consider an impossible situation will find ways to get around that situation. It's basically man's triumph over oppression, misplaced authority, and basic ignorance.
Though mutinies are inevitably doomed, the sea will always play host to such revolts. They compel us because the passions from which mutinies arise lie within all men. For like a troubled ship on uncertain waters, so too the human soul endeavors against the tide to be free.